there's a darkness to this world. I felt there had to be a deeper meaning. This book is not from a human being. This is a scripture that's coming directly from divinity. Just opening the book, I felt like a tsunami of love, and I felt like whatever my trajectory was in this world was changed in an instant. I did start to use the book initially as an oracle. I've had 3 revelatory experiences where the whole world disappeared. When I pierced the veil, then everything was gone. He said, "You're just not ready for sustained revelation. If you had sustained revelation, the body would not long last. And if your mind is powerful enough to forget God, it must be powerful enough to remember God." Jesus is teaching a completely different view of forgiveness. This is just so deep because he's saying you don't forgive someone for what they did to you. You don't forgive someone for what they didn't do that you think they should have done. You forgive your brother for...
Wow! Dude!
How massively
when that
different.
lands, oh my God! For those that haven't come across A Course in Miracles, what do you say to them that A Course is?
Well, I think it's like a modern day scripture. A lot of times people know that the Bible and the whole Judeo-Christian, genre has been around for thousands of years. And I know you've had Aaron Apke on and had some great talks about that. But I think it's a modern day scripture that I'd say is like 1% principle, but you have to really study to get that principle down really good. And then it's 99% practice. But I would say it's a spiritual psychotherapy for waking up, for enlightenment, self-realization.
It's interesting because it uses a lot of biblical references, but it in some ways it couldn't be. It's almost like it got a polarity to biblical. I mean, maybe we should start with the fact that God didn't create this world. Can you unpack that for us? Like that has some serious implications straight out of the gate.
Yeah, that was one of the things I always pondered about, like, because if you look at the history of philosophy, they wrestle with, good and evil, and if there is a God, how did we end up with this world and so forth. But, the Course is just saying that God is eternal life, eternal oneness, and who we are is eternal oneness, but this world is a tiny mad idea that we forgot to laugh at, and we took it seriously, and then it, gave us a world of time and space, a big bang. And so it's time and space is temporary. We know that for sure. And what is eternal? We don't have anything in this world that's eternal, but we're told that eternal life is actually reality, and that this world of time and space is a projection of error. Yeah.
It's interesting, that projection of error, because I am still trying to reconcile and find within my head and heart whether A Course in Miracles is life affirming or not, because it's and pardon me for, coming that way, but I mean, when it seems very deeply present in the Course that, well, I should probably ask you and let you speak about perception and illusion before I go further with my question, but it does seem like it implies that the world is quite illusory.
Yeah, there's a lot of ancient Chinese, lots of ancient Indian philosophies that talk about Maya and illusion. And so, this is a very non-dualistic course pointing at oneness that transcends opposites. So I think one way we could talk about it being illusory is it's a projection of opposites. It's a projection of a split mind that plays itself out in terms of images in time and space, and it has opposites. And reality, we're told, is absolute oneness without end. And so these opposites put a veil of illusion over, or a maya over the top of reality. So it's different than a lot of New Age teachings that talk about different realities, and you create, like New Age, you create your own reality. A Course in Miracles is definitely not that, because it's saying God is the creator of reality, and we can only accept reality as God created it. We cannot make it, change it, invent it, twist it, do anything to it, because it's eternal, or what Byron Katie sometimes calls what is. And what is eternal.
So, but one hand, you've said God created this reality, but on the other hand, one of the teachings is God did not create this world.
Yeah. Well, God creates reality in the sense that spirit creates spirit creates spirit. So God is pure spirit. Christ, people associate the word Christ or Christos with Jesus, but the man was an illusion because everything of time and space is an illusion, but he was pointing to an I am presence. Before Abraham was I am. He was pointing to the Christ, which is the same identity that you and I and everyone shares, but it's a divine I amness. It's a spiritual I amness. So yeah, the Course is definitely not saying God creates anything that's temporary. God only creates the eternal. And that everything that's temporary is just a projection of a belief called ego. It's just a projection of error.
The Bible has this concept of a fall, and I think A Course in Miracle has a parallel concept, but with very different underpinning meanings. Can you describe what the fall really is then from A Course in Miracles point of view?
Yeah, Jesus has one sentence. He says, "Into eternity where all is one, there crept a tiny, mad idea at which the Son of God remembered not to laugh." And in one sentence, he kind of reinterprets Genesis for us very quickly.
I mean, can you unpack that a little bit further for us? Because there's humor in there, there's levity in there, but also life
Yeah,
can be quite serious for some
yeah.
people that, yeah, it's like there's a whole non-attachment piece, and there's so much in there.
There's a lot into it because he's basically saying that the world will end in laughter. He does say that at one point. And that's very different from our doomsday, end of the world, last judgment associations with Christianity. But I think the most important thing is that he says there's a correction for the error, that correction has already been applied. It's already complete. And he does at one point say this world was over long ago. And he also says we are but looking back at a point in which the world ended, imagining we're still making the journey and looking back on what has already gone by. So it's like we're viewing a movie that is already like the old theaters, it's already in the can. It's got the old theaters had the projectors and you're just watching something that's a film that's already been made. It's done. You're just watching it. But when we're in there as an audience in the movie theater, we go into the movie. We see ourselves as being there inside of the movie, rooting for the characters, rooting for the good ones, and uh, warning about the bad ones. And it's like we make an imaginary reality that isn't reality at all. It's a fiction, kind of like Walt Disney. He drew a mouse. He drew a mouse and he called it Mickey, and then he drew another mouse and he called it Minnie. And then he came up with animation. He just flicked those images fast enough in a repetitive way that they look like they were actually moving. And they do look, that's what animation is when we watch Pocahontas or Lion King. And Jesus is saying the same thing with the world we perceive. It seems very real, but I think if you looked at it, there's even a majority of scientists around the world now that are saying the world is some kind of fiction. It's some kind of a matrix. The word that the scientists use, they say simulation. And I know you have scientists on and when you get into quantum physics, this is a very sophisticated simulation. And while we believe in it, we call it reality because it does seem to be the only thing going on. If you have mystical experiences, which I've had 3 revelatory experiences where the whole world disappeared and it was just absolute abstract light. And I was like stunned that what is this? Because it was like I pierced the veil 3 times. And then when I pierced the veil, then everything was gone. That was the world. It disappeared. Like Gary Renard's book, it disappeared from me 3 times. And then I just came back to go deeper into what I need to do to have that be a consistent, constant experience.
I definitely want to speak about that. It's really fascinating because, well, background as an astrologer, can't help but to consider there's these, like, I think it's called a quark, which is where a star has already passed away in the night sky and already imploded in on itself, and it's actually in real time no longer there. Yeah, but the light of it is still traveling to you, so you still see it as it's ever present. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's that star there. And it's like, do you know if it's alive or if it's actually,
It's long
just like because
gone.
it takes light years for the
Yeah.
light to travel
Yeah.
towards us. Really fascinating. The question still stands though, is because so I want to. Sorry, this gives us permission to actually ask the question. There we go. Thank you. Life affirming or not? Because I mean, in some ways, it's saying that everything around us is illusory. Everything around us is immaterial. Everything around us is not eternal. And don't buy in to that story. So does that not create a distance between the individual and the experience that they're having? And then, some tantric teachers will then be like, "That's not life affirming," because then to go into the whole thing is to like, do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I do. I think because I was raised Christian and I spent 10 years full-time in university and went into science and everything. So I had a real well-rounded background. But when I got to the Course in Miracles, I thought, you know, this is a total inside out look at everything because maybe the way I had it was outside in, but what it's saying is the kingdom of heaven is within, and that our very being, who we are, is the kingdom of heaven because it's our Christ identity, but that's pure light. So what I saw, what you're talking about is I said, well, I just need to maybe admit that I was wrong about my definition of life. Maybe my definition of life was biological. And maybe I was completely wrong about that because it is temporary. And there's something in us that wants, even our love songs, we want forever love. We're not interested in something that's going to end. We are unsatisfied with endings and beginnings. And when I read that line from Jesus, before Abraham was, I am, I can only imagine how that stirred things up 2,000 years ago, because the Jewish tradition and the Talmud and everything,
The blasphemy of it.
it was a blasphemy. That's when they were ready to stone him and chase him, push him off the cliff. But I've come to see now that, I mean, there was one time I was listening to A Course in Miracles teach. I was doing the dishes and I had a cassette on at that time, way back decades ago. And somebody in the audience said, what does A Course in Miracles say about life on other planets? And the teacher said, the Course says there's no life on this planet. And I was just doing the dishes. You got to picture me doing the dishes. And I'm going, okay. Because then the more I read the Course, I was saying it's a redefinition of life to being eternal, like without beginning or end. And we're accustomed to life as being biological, with birth and death as cycles. So, and all of our astrological signs and everything that we use, is got that assumption of life being in form. At one point, Jesus says, love is content and not form of any kind. So you really have to go into the question of, okay, what is content then? If we grew up about form and content, if love is content and not form of any kind, then maybe these mystical experiences are pointing us towards a vastness that is not contained in time and space or bodies.
I think this is the perfect juncture to have a look at what the Course tells us about perception.
Well, it says perception is an invention. That there is no perception in heaven, and perception always involves form, and perception is temporary by definition, and perception is what we perceive through our five senses. So that kind of gives us a start with perception, but then suddenly when we read Jesus's words, he's teaching us that there's just two kinds of perception. One is fragmented perception, separate people, places, things, objects, stars, galaxies, black holes, quasars, so forth. And then there's unified perception. That's something like maybe Muji might call it unified awareness. But unified perception is perception without judgment. So it's just almost like if you were watching leaves blowing in the wind and you didn't make any distinction about any of the leaves blowing in the wind. You just saw leaves blowing in the wind. That's unified perception, what Jesus called judge not in the Bible, in the Sermon on the Mount. It's just perception without judgment. And then he goes on to be more specific. He says the body's eyes will continue to report differences, but the healed mind will put them into one category. They are not real. So he's giving us two different perceptions. One, he's saying, is the Holy Spirit's, which is purely non-judgmental, just purely acceptance, holistic perception of the world. And then there's personal, egoic perception, which is fragmented, which would teach us that you and I are different people on in different countries across the Pacific and having a conversation here over the internet. But that's what he calls fragmented or distorted perception.
I feel so honored to be able to do this podcast, to be honest, because there's just the research material for your podcast today. I mean, I picked up somewhere along the way, the ego is the thing that is operating to try and keep us safe from dangers. However, ego is the danger. It's like, wait, what did you just say? Like, these pearls that emerge are so, and I definitely want to speak to you about the light that appeared to you 3 times. But also, one of the key questions that I think arrives at this juncture for the listener tuning in is, hey, like, you're basically turning my awareness of my senses and, how to trust reality, you're basically inverting it completely. Ones are turning into zeros and zeros are turning into ones, right? If it is binary, right? Which it's non-dual, so whoops, already erring. But anyway, there's so many questions here, and maybe you can take your pick, but one of them's like, why would we be given this perception that is inverted from our true nature, if that is our true nature, and what role and service does that play? But I think that can probably quickly end up philosophical. I mean, what was going on for you potentially, David, because you said I had a moment where it was all inside out. What was going on for you personally that you felt the need to sort of invert your entire experience, or potentially even open to the inversion?
Yeah. I think I just grew overwhelmed and weary and just felt like there has to be more. And if there is, what is my part in that finding more or extending more or getting in touch with what that more is? And so I was in university for 10 years full time and ended up, leaving a graduate program on a full scholarship and kind of jumping off and going off to a hermitage like Henry David Thoreau or one of the transcendentalists, often by a lake, by myself in a little trailer going, okay, give it to me straight, like Henry David Thoreau. Just tell it to me straight. I'll publish it to the whole world. If it's dark, give it to me straight. If it's bright, give it to me straight. And then A Course in Miracles came to me at a humanistic psychology conference in La Jolla, California. And I opened the book and I felt like a tsunami of love.
How old were you?
I was about 28 years old.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry
and now 68. So 40 years ago, 4 decades ago, just opening the book, I felt like a tsunami of love. And I felt like whatever my trajectory was in this world, whatever I intended to do with my life and whatever was changed in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. And I didn't know what that meant even, but I thought, wow, what is this? And then I did start to use the book initially as an oracle, just praying and having questions and popping open the book, I thought randomly, but being answered as if there was like an oracle talking to me and answering my every question. And then eventually that led into these mystical revelatory experiences where I was kind of shown the light beyond this world that the veil of this world was covering. And I also was told that revelatory experiences were very, very rare, and that the scribe of A Course in Miracles had had one revelatory experience, and that it was mind-blowing because she was a research psychologist in Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, and so it was a mind-blowing thing, and that's how I felt it was. But also it showed me experientially the aha, that was even beyond the big picture of this world. It was it was like a touchstone with reality, uh, but a real quick glimpse. I lost track of time completely in that experience.
Why didn't you just write the whole experience off if it happened so briefly?
Well, it happened the second time, and then it happened the third time, and believe me, the ego was wanting to write all three of them off. Like, get serious. And I did go to a lot of NDE, near-death experience conferences, and the people were saying the same thing when they had this experience of the light. They couldn't tell their family, their friends. They were closet NDE experiencers, and then they'd sometimes go to a conference and come out of the closet. So I did a lot of traveling and teaching, and occasionally I would just very rarely share the experience, and somebody would wait, and when the crowd left, come up and go, "Oh my God, you're the only person I've ever heard talk about this." And I had one too, and so it was a kind of an interesting phenomenon.
David, could you speak to us of devotion and what that means to you personally? I mean, you retired at 34, gave your mind, body, career, everything over to Jesus. Jesus at some point says you won't have a career. And it's like, sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Sorry, that's really flip. But I mean, it's like it's a lot for the little mind to comprehend. Pardon me, I can't help myself. Luckily, you said that quote earlier from Jesus. Touch it, so we can excuse my bedside manner. Might have to actually put that on the actual channel description. Anyway, I'm digressing. Your relationship with devotion. I mean, what does devotion mean to you?
Well, I always thought of devotion is to something greater or more, and I saw that as God. Although
But
when
why was it
people ask me,
important? Sorry to interrupt. Why was it important? Like,
it just felt like I was searching for meaning. Like a lot of people have read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And all the concentration camp experiences.
Beautiful, deep, small,
Yeah.
short,
Very
poignant,
deep, philosophical. I was searching for meaning. And then when I started to have these experiences, they were so profound that I just thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm on the cusp or getting a little glimpse of meaning. Because I think with this world, the fragmented world, people fall into meaninglessness. That's why there's such a high suicide rate. That's why depression is rampant. Or even in Japan, groups of teenagers going out in a van to commit group suicides and things. There's a darkness to this world. And I felt there had to be a deeper meaning. And I kept being told by all the great spiritual masters that meaning was inside. And I said, what does inside mean? It can't be inside a body. It must be maybe inside my mind or my soul or something. And how do I access that? How do I get in? And I was told prayer and meditation. And that can even get very repetitive. We can have repetitive prayers, but he was talking about something deeper. Like the prayer is the altar of our mind or the desire of our mind. And then I read one line from Jesus where he said, truth will be returned to your awareness by your desire, as it was lost by your desire for something else. So when I read that, I just went, oh, wow, whatever that desire is, if that's in my mind, and that's got to be very powerful, that it means that in some sense I must have wished for this world, almost like a fairy tale. I must have wished for something more than everything. And then this world is the answer to that wish. But Jesus is saying, fear not, it has been already corrected. But you have to accept the correction. And your sole responsibility is not the error. Don't get caught up in analyzing the error or trying to figure it out, because you'll be stuck in that error. It's a tricky error. But you're not responsible for the error, but you are responsible for accepting the correction. So I devoted my life to what Jesus calls atonement. He says that's our sole responsibility. Accept the atonement. Not atonement in the biblical way where we're atoning for sins of the past, but
Yeah, this
just
is
in terms
important,
of
please.
correction, purely
Please.
correction.
Can you unpack that further? Because a lot of people tuning in will still be thinking of sin as you say that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think when I look at the word sin, I go back to the Aramaic word. What did Jesus mean? And it was missing the mark. Now, sin took on a connotation as like a black mark on your soul. You're born a sinner, and everyone's a sinner, and you have to say the sinner's prayer,
Got
and I
woven
never
in with like
resonated.
karmic
Yeah,
tendencies, yeah. Tough
very
word, which
deep
is
kind of
really deep
karmic.
place to take something.
Yes. But what Jesus is teaching us is that the atonement, that the error has been corrected, that sin is an error to be corrected, and he's teaching us that it actually already has been corrected. And that's why, if you follow this path of atonement, you have a life of joy, of happiness, peace, harmony, full communication, no secrets, no deceptions, no distortions. And to me, it's like, yeah. I'm willing to devote to that. And then when I actually did devote to it, I was just as surprised as anyone, because I thought, well, there goes if you give up your career, what are you going to fall back on? What good is your diploma if you don't have a career and a job? What good is that? And Jesus was speaking to me at that point. I could start to hear his voice very directly, and he was saying, I'll take care of everything that does not matter if you'll just focus on what matters. And I said, what does that mean? He said, I'll take care of time and space. Time and space, all your physical needs, your emotional needs, your mental needs. I'll take care of everything. You need something to eat, a place to sleep. I'll handle all the things that don't matter if you'll just give your devotion to following my instructions and give me your full devotion. That's what I was offered. And I actually said yes to it. I mean, I was in my 20s, but I was
I love how surprised you are by the fact in and of yourself too.
I was surprised I said yes, because I did have a few discussions with him. I said, you can't go out in the tree in the backyard and just pick $20 bills. I was trying to explain to him how it is on earth. And he was just saying, yeah, I've been there. He was very lighthearted. Yeah, I've been there. I know that. But he was telling me that he would arrange time and space if I would open myself to be devoted to miracles. And I said, okay. Then the actual thing was when I went out on the road for 5.5 weeks, 6 weeks at a time. It was happening. And every single day it was happening. I didn't even know where I was going to sleep from day to day, or where the food would come from, and where the gasoline would go for the petrol for the car. I had no idea with any of that. So it turned very quickly, very mystical to me, but also very practical, because I believe I have to eat. I believe I have to sleep. I'm not going to be sleeping out under the stars every night. That's too much. You're going to have to show me. So I said, you show me. And he did. The first trip, the second trip, the third trip. And then he started to do it with worldwide trips. Here, you're going to Argentina. How am I going to Argentina? A friend comes up. I never met the guy named David. And he says, I want a Latin America airline. It was like a promotional thing for one. The grand prize was 1 million frequent flyer miles. And the guy said he won. And then the guy invited me to come with him and bring 2 guests and go to Argentina. And I'm like, you kidding? And he's like, I said, don't you need one of those thingamajiggies? And he said, it's a passport, David. It's called a passport. Because I really had no wish for it or whim to go traveling around the world. But then off I go with donated frequent flyer miles. And it just went on for years and years and years. So it's an experiential thing for me. It's one thing to theorize about these things, but it's another thing to just say yes and say, okay, you say you're going to take care of things, then you're going to have to show me, because I'm not just going to take it on blind faith. You're going to have to demonstrate to me that this will actually work for me in place of a career and all the other stuff I learned.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. I wanted to take a moment and thank all of you that are subscribed to this podcast. Everything you see around here, like I like to say, touch wood, is powered and empowered by your subscription to this podcast. It costs you nothing. It's completely free. There's a button down below. It lights up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution when I say the word subscribe. And if you can hit that button, hit that bell notification icon, it's completely free. It gives you the opportunity to support the channel so guests like this can come on and share their insights, share their wisdom. Every week we do 2 episodes a week. And once a month we actually gather with the guests inside the Inspired Evolution Community Circle. Here, if you start to fall in love with the content, just know that's the space for connection around the content. It's the Inspired Evolution Community Circle. We affectionately call it the Circle. The center's empty. It's not about Amrit. I'm just one of us. And once a month we get together and we run kind of like a podcast where you guys ask the questions of the guests when they come on. We also gather once a week. I guide meditations. There's community sharing circles. If there's astrological updates, there's breath work. There's a bit of yoga. There's all sorts of cool stuff happening inside there, and lots of people meeting people in person as well. We've done our best to make several live, interactive, connection oriented, so it's less there is text-based connection, absolutely, but it's this opportunity to really connect, especially as we move into this Aquarian age. Yeah, we're going to need Aquarius rules community. We're going to need more community. It's about the I and the we. Pisces had the fish, schools of thought. This is all shifting under our feet right now. So as we're looking for tribe and connection, Inspired Evolution Community Circle, come on in, give it a whirl, yeah, and just see if it's for you. And it really supports the channel as well. So thank you so much for all of you that are part of the community and supporting the channel and this work, doing the things that it's doing in the world. Really, really, really sincerely appreciate you all. And we'd love to welcome those of you that are inspired to evolve on the inside. And I'm mentioning that as well because today's episode goes super deep, yeah, and it's conversations like this that we're having inside the circle amongst a community of peers. So if that sounds inspiring to you, do check us out, inspiredevolution.com/circle. It's interesting that 1% and that 99% that you referred to earlier, the 99% being it's actually a practice, it's 1%. I mean, even for so many people, like, Picking up the book, this 1% can seem so dense. I mean, even myself, like I've tried motoring my way whole through the book. It doesn't happen. It just does not happen. There is no motoring through this book. It's like colons on colons on colons on colons. You just...
Yeah. I had a friend when I went to Australia. I went there 7 consecutive years to Australia, and during one of the events, she just turned to me with the biggest smile on her face, and she said, "You knew this book before you came." She said with the biggest smile on her face, like somehow you were just super ready, like a soul incarnating with like really high readiness. Because she said, you just read this stuff and it sticks in your mind. Most people can't remember the paragraph that they just read, and you are talking about the content of the paragraph like it's the back of your hand. And she's like, you must have already know this before. And then I think as soon as I was really grasping it and feeling it and having these huge heart openings and experiences, then I just was like, okay, what's best here on planet Earth? And Jesus is like, well, the people are into movies. They like music. We have to go for things that they enjoy. We have to unpack it in ways and parables and music and types of things that they will absolutely be attracted to because, ancient scriptures, people will spend their whole life trying to decipher. Yogananda spent time and different ones, with these ancient scriptures. But he said, I want you to use it in new ways where people can go, aha. And then I started doing movie gatherings and people I reported to me that they went into their first mystical experience in their entire lifetime, not through LSD or psychedelics, but through the movie gathering I was doing. They were just, their mind just went right in with me, like The Matrix, or, there's so many great ones, Truman Show. They would just go, oh, I love that movie. Can I watch it with you? And I said, sure. And then I kind of set it up. There was an elderly couple. I said it. They said, what's this movie, The Matrix, everyone's talking about? I said, have you seen it? They were both in their 70s. They said, no, we haven't. Can we watch it with you? So I went in, I set up The Matrix using a lot of things they could understand. And these 70-year-old people with white hair, they were like, their eyes were wide open afterwards. They were like, oh my God, I would have never seen all that stuff if you hadn't been here. So I'm like the guide that's taking them almost like an angel. And that's what I do pretty much most every Saturday with a worldwide audience. And we all go diving down together. And it's delicious. People really can't wait. They get their chairs ready and they're in different countries. And we have different language translations now because Zoom has improved so much. So we have Japanese watching and Germans watching. And
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
it's just Jesus using what people can relate to, because admittedly, many people pick up the course and it just seems too thick. Like, I don't know what, I can't read this book.
Seems like such a miracle in and of itself that it seems so transparent to someone like yourself. But on that note, you also did spend 8 hours a day for 2 years straight reading the book too, though. There is just so we don't make it sound like there's like a light just switched on. There was also some, devotion. I asked the question with some awareness touch on it. It's interesting because we are living through quite an interesting time at this particular moment in time. It was seen. Some part of me wonders if you would just say time is an illusion. I don't know, but you've also been teaching deeply on the importance of presence. Maybe I'm conflating these two things all at once, but some part of me feels intuitively the case to be so. Is it an interesting time that we're in right now? And why is presence? What is presence? Why is it so important to connect to presence at a time like this?
I think of presence is like, it's what unifies our mind, unifies our awareness. So we try to make sense of a past, present, future world. And it was one thing to be told that God just creates eternally and God only creates the eternal. But then Jesus unpacks it and he says, the ego invented linear time and the ego invented past, present, future, and it tries to force continuity onto them. And I was like, force continuity? So it's trying to convince us that linear time is real and that the present moment is this tiny little blip that's covered over very quickly. And Jesus is saying, yeah, that version of time is a trick. But now we have to come to practicalities. And so that opens for me up to the topic of guidance, because when people say, well, how's it been for you? Okay, it's one thing to have revelatory experiences when you were maybe in your late 20s or early 30s, but what about the practicalities of day-to-day living in this world? And I would say, well, as soon as I started to tune in to the Spirit, like the Holy Spirit, to Jesus, then the guidance started to come like downloads. And it was where to go, what to do, who to see, start a nonprofit. These are logistical things that have now been helpful symbols. Like nonprofit is a helpful symbol. because I wasn't planning on having a career. So with Jesus leading me this way, so it turned into real practicality in motion, that inner guidance, that intuitive guidance. So I've been teaching people that it's actually possible to be 100% intuitive and 0% analytical, because only the ego analyzes. The Holy Spirit accepts.
Yeah, I'm imagining that's quite difficult for the audience member that's tuning in to sink into.
Yeah, it was hard for me. I was in university for 10 years, and I was in engineering and urban planning. You can only imagine when I started reading the course
I can.
and
I was an
going,
engineer for 15
what?
years too.
Like, what? Trust you for what?
Mm.
Let go of what? It just was like, it just seemed like huge leaps of faith. But the funny thing is, when I did leap, then I was like, oh, you were right.
Mm.
I couldn't have even taken it in before, but then some of these leaps of faith through the experience and the practical application, that's how I was shown.
That is interesting because the question started with presence and then you landed us in guidance. And it seems like, yeah, there's maybe a helping hand that's helping you land within. It's almost like guidance is holding space for presence in some way. Is presence one of the many practices from, the 99% that you were referring to, or is it the central practice, in your opinion?
I think it's the central practice. That's really what I'm devoted to. And I look at someone like Eckhart Tolle, and that he's been quite consistent over his decades of
He's been
teaching.
present to presence. Is that what you just said?
Presence, yeah. He's
Sorry,
very
sorry.
dedicated to that. Every talk is the same thing. And I like that because whereas he had that park bench experience in London, I had my revelatory experiences. He was not able to function for a long time, months after that experience, because it was so far beyond anything he'd ever experienced. And for me, the revelations were that. But then I did come back and say, okay, now what? Now where do I go from here? And that's where the guidance really came in big time.
Do you think there are people that are experiencing revelations potentially to this podcast, and are probably trying to pick up the pieces on the other side? What do you offer into that space? Like, how did you navigate when you had a breakthrough experience?
Yeah, I think it comes from such a deep part within us that we must be ready and we must allow it, because it's very uncommon. It's very rare. And yet what Jesus was teaching me, he didn't call his book A Course in Revelation. He called it A Course in Miracles, because he said, you're just not ready for sustained revelation. If you had sustained revelation, the body would not long last. You wouldn't need it. You would be casting it aside quickly, because there's no need for it. But you need miracles to prepare your mind and make yourself ready. And he said, under the Christ guidance, it can take you into a state of revelation readiness. And that's what all of us want. We want to know thyself, like the ancient Greeks said. We want self-realization that Yogananda talked about. We want self-actualization that Abraham Maslow talked about. We read the books. We read those terms and we went, woo, that sounds delicious. And Maslow said, well, there's a whole hierarchy of needs you have to work your way through first before you get up to self-actualization. And Yogananda would say the same thing, and Jesus is saying the same thing. So he's very practical. He just meets us where we believe we are, and then says, just connect in with me and go up the ladder, the imaginary ladder.
It's interesting because when we start talking about like hierarchies and pyramids and journeys, it seems like there are levels. And then it's interesting to consider the word levels when the teaching is oneness. Isn't that a bit trippy?
It is. I read the course for years, decades, and then Jesus said, I want you to make a website and I want you to call it levelsofmind.com. And so okay. So I put all my diagrams, all my exercises, everything that he had taught me in one website. And what it was he was saying, think of your mind as like concentric circles. And I said, oh, I love diagrams. I always like school to draw diagrams. So I drew concentric circles. And he said, at the outer ring is your perceptual, you asked me about perception, that's your perceptual realm. So everything that you perceive through the five senses is really your mind perceiving the outer ring. He said, I said, what's underneath the outer ring? He said, glad you asked, because the inner rings cause the outer rings. And you need to get into the inner rings to change the outer ring. You mean I can change my perception of the world if I can get into the rings underneath? Okay, I'm excited. What's the ring right under perception? He said, that's your emotions. And a friend of mine, she, got me an article on the ones who invented Vipassana. I think they were in Thailand. They would meet every year. The founders of Vipassana would meet, and they would say, how are you doing? They said, I went really deep in my meditations, but I hit a ring of fear. All of them hit the same ring of fear. And Jesus is like, that ring of fear is right underneath your five senses, your perceptual realm. If you go into your mind, you're going to first hit the ring of fear. I said, well, what causes fear? He said, your cognition, your thoughts. That's the next ring. Perceptions, emotions, cognition, your thoughts. Oh my gosh. So my thoughts are producing the fear. Yes. My thoughts are producing the fear and the perceptions I see with my five senses. Exactly. What's under cognition? What causes the thoughts? He said, your beliefs. He said, you can believe things about your thoughts that aren't true, but they generate your thoughts. So you mean if I have underlying beliefs that I'm not even aware of, they're generating all my grievances, my opinions, my attack thoughts, and producing my emotions and producing the world? He said, exactly. I said, okay, this is getting deep now. What is there something under beliefs? He said, yeah, that's the core. You come to the core. You come to the altar. Your desire. Your desire is at the core, and your beliefs arise out of your desire. You have to desire forgiveness, as he's teaching it, to change all the cognition, the emotions, and the perception to reflect love. You have to desire the truth. Desire the truth and know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Knock and the door shall be opened. Oh my gosh, all the stuff he was teaching in the Bible, but he was giving it to me in modern day psychological terms, because if everything's one, why do I need to know about the levels? And he said, everything is one in heaven, but you desired something more than heaven, and now you believe in separation.
Only a person could desire more than heaven.
That's right.
Sorry.
We always go, how do I have to be such an idiot to want more than everything, But we know how it is with humans too, You get all the buzz and all the things of time and space, and you want more. You want more.
It's neurotic. I'm just going to call it out.
Yeah, that's it. But then I started to understand the levels when he was talking about levels of mind. And basically he said, even with those 5 rings, he said, I can simplify it. You need to get in touch with your mind, because your mind is where the causation is. But when you're asleep and dreaming, you put causation out onto form. In physics, for every action, there's a reaction. We have causation in terms of form. Look at our relationships. We have to conform to our beliefs about cause and effect, or, what? You forgot our anniversary? Don't you love me anymore? You see, we're so caught up into cause and effects in form that we don't realize that it's the mind. We're not in touch with the power of the mind.
How does one authentically shift beliefs then? is it to come down into that layer of desire? Like, how do you authentic? Because I mean, some part of when people go, "Oh, I'll choose to believe," make a choice, and it's almost like you're
Yeah.
faking it till you make it to some degree. But how do
Yeah.
you authentically shift a belief?
Yeah, I think it's through a life of deep devotion, like you desire the transcendent, you desire the infinite, the spirit, call it God, call it whatever you want. Atman, it doesn't matter what culture, what tradition, but but by having a desire for that, you're really saying you have a desire for peace. And if you have a desire for peace and you stay with that desire like a torch, like a bright torch in your mind, then those beliefs will get exposed. And they do get exposed. They may be hidden in the unconscious mind, but if you desire truth, then they come up and they do get exposed. And then you can release them once they're exposed.
What if people believe they don't have that desire? As you said, they might be hidden. Like, what if some people tuning in go, "I don't have any sort of desire like that to devote myself to anything"?
Well, what Jesus says is you take your little willingness and you put it with the Holy Spirit, and that kind combines into a power surge that begins to set your mind free. Just your little willingness combines with the call, an internal call back to truth that's so strong. It's like a magnet, like beam me up, Scotty. It's going to really go beam us up if we have a little willingness. So I think at the very beginning, if you don't have that desire, it's like, sure, that's the way it can seem to be. So, but you can have a little willingness. And even when people do the workbook lessons, I just say, just hang in there and just keep at it with your little willingness. And I do everything I can to kind of inspire and bless and help and resources and tools and puts things on the web and do whatever I can to help take that spark and help that go into a flame. Because it usually starts out with most people as just like a tiny spark.
What are some of the transformative or more transformative experiences you've experienced for people that have attuned themselves to the work?
Well, I think you become, I mean, for me, it's like more telepathic. Um, I know I watched when Aaron Apke was on your programs, and he was talking about the Nazarenes and the
Touch wood.
time around Jesus, the way they lived. And I was very inspired by the way the Nazarenes lived. So around the early, let's say, like in the 1990s somewhere, I decided I want to do that because I've heard Aaron say on your program he would like to maybe have a spiritual community one day, and certainly you have one.
Touch
Uh,
wood.
it's amazing. And so I thought I want to have a spiritual community, and because I think that would be a symbol that would be helpful that the spirit could use in a beautiful way. But then I decided to go radical like the Nazarenes. We're going to share property, no personal ownership. I mean, let's go like the Nazarenes. They've set the tone, Jesus and the Nazarenes. Who cares if it's in the 2000s, 2000s now? I'm not interested. I started off in the 1990s. I was saying, okay, let's do a spiritual community. Anybody in there with me? So I formed a nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit, and I said, this is it. We just share everything, and we're going for God. And then that evolved over the years, and it's still going. Decades later, our little Nazarene-like community is still going with the same basic principles. Do we have like 10 commandments we follow? No, we only have 2 guidelines. For the whole community, only 2 guidelines. No people pleasing. Like, say what you mean what you say. Don't hold back with your feelings. Don't dance around anything. No people pleasing. Really speak from your heart. And no private thoughts. Let's not have secrets. I think if we don't have secrets, we'll open up faster than we ever would. Only 2 guidelines, not 10 commandments, just 2 guidelines.
that sounds hard enough to do with just one person. There's hundreds, there's thousands of people in this community. What are you doing? What are you
Yeah,
doing?
I know. If anybody wants to try it out, imagine it. Just try doing it, because the ego doesn't like that. It's going to try to destroy that, crash it down 100 different ways and everything. But amazingly, like 3 decades later, it's still going. And what it is it's beautiful, because then people can be very prayerful, very devoted, very intuitive. Like you have different skills from your background, astrological skills and communication skills. Imagine if you have people coming together in kind of an umbrella, under an umbrella of communal living, and they don't have to be concerned about who's going to pay the light bill, because it's part of it all. Has to all get handled. We still have to handle that. You still have to do everything that the government or the world requires, but it's communal. So it's not on any one person's shoulders. So then your skills and abilities are freed up to really expand. And we have people that have great musical skills, composing skills, engineering skills, all kinds of skills that they've had. Instead of having professions where they're earning money individually, those skills get used and kind of channelized in a devotional life where everything is shared. And then the emotions come up. Of course, all the dark that Carl Jung talked about, the shadow. Will the shadow come up? Yes. But we've got our Course in Miracles, and Jesus constantly telling us, release the grievances, let the darkness up. Don't stuff it down and repress it and deny it. Let it up and let it go. Let it up and let it go. So it's quite, I called it an experiment, but the experiment is still going. And now I'm getting a little more mystical than I was before, because I used to eat before, but now I'm I'm kind of down into like a liquid diet. I'm not yet to the breatharian phase, but quickly zooming there with my liquid diets. I have a nice container of liquid to follow me around where I go, but it's kind of just, the joy is very strong. There's a lot of trust and joy and connection and free flow of communication. That's what your program's about, is about free flow of ideas. Let's not try to put anybody down or judge anybody. Let's just invite people to come on and share their ideas. And you have, astrologers and different ones from different fields that come. And that's what we have in our community. But they're also very devotional. They're deeply into prayer. It's getting super telepathic, actually, is what it's coming into.
Yeah, we have this beautiful corner in our Inspired Evolution community circle called the Prayer Space. And we had one of the teachers we heard was Lynn McTaggart, that did the power of intention and that work. And they got some of the people that measured Joe Dispenza's work and all that sort of stuff behind Lynn's work as well. And they measured that somehow when 8 people or more collect behind an intention, they saw like more deeper ripples in material manifestations. And I was like, wow, And so we've got this little prayer space, and everybody sort of tunes in. And once you've added to the prayer your own thoughts and intentions, you can just heart it. And so you can sort of see, oh, this prayer has 30 people behind it. It's got a vibe. It's got a vibe.
That's
It's
very
interesting. My question, which I was surprised by myself, why is the symbol of community important? Because you used the word symbol before. I mean, the intuitive question to ask would be, why is the experience of community so important? But let's maybe honor the symbol of community. I'm not even sure why I'm asking that.
Well, let's just say that what Jesus is saying is that the ego projected the world of time and space. So even these words we're speaking are symbols, and everything in the cosmos is symbols. So what Jesus is saying, what if there is a purposeful intention or use for those symbols that will set you free from the symbols? It's actually using the symbols to set you free from the symbols. And maybe in the East, in Buddhism, they might call it mindfulness, for example, being very mindful, Thich Nhat Hanh, very focused like that. That's what Jesus is doing with us, is he's saying, be very focused and use the symbols, but don't take them to be reality. because as soon as you identify with the symbol, then you have something to defend. Anytime you identify with something of time and space that the ego made, you can quickly become defensive because you use the word my community. It's very subtle. So what he's saying is, if you allow the spirit, the intuitive part of you, we'll call it the Holy Spirit, if you allow the spirit to use the symbols, it will channelize all the symbols in a direction that will set your mind free. And what is that? You go into communion. And communion is, I'll call it vertical. It's a vertical connection with spirit instead of the horizontal plane. I always say the cross is like where the vertical and the horizontal intersect. The vertical is the Christ, and the horizontal would seem to be Jesus, the man in Nazareth back 2,000 years ago. So the goal is always communion with Source, and not to try to freeze down into identifying with the symbols. Just allow the symbols to be used in a very joyful, intuitive way, which is what we're doing with community, where there's not a sense of ownership. We do podcasts, we do audios, videos, and Spotify and all these different things, and yet we don't have any personal ownership. So nobody's really wanting to toot their own horn. We just want the communion experience of connection. That's what we're desiring. We're not interested in the trappings of kind of misidentifying with, because that's where pride comes in. You start to identify with the personhood, and then that takes you into pride, and then there's jealousy and greed and possession, ownership. I mean, you get all the other things that come in with the ego as soon as you try to identify with the personal perspective.
It's incredibly profound. It was quite intentional. I mean, as you're talking about symbols, it was quite intentional that, the Inspired Evolution Community Circle, we called it the Circle, right? Because the center's empty. And it is like, the Inspired Evolution podcast, as me here as a host, could very easily become Amarit's Community, And I was just like, mate, I'm not in the middle. I'm standing around here with all of y'all.
Yeah. Arm in arm with the circle.
Whether we've got our hands together in prayer or our hats out begging, I don't know. I'm here right with you.
That's it. That's beautiful.
But the poignancy of symbols, like it's actually it's really interesting, really, really interesting. But what I heard from you as well is the symbols are necessary crystallizations along the way, which can give us a bit of a grapple, but don't get overly attached to them. Make sure you keep flowing, keep moving. And community actually helps us feel that as well, because community is different every day, It's like, and that's also one of the most affirming things I've found is like people being able to share their experiences and where they are. So I'm collectively feeling like this a little bit, that tuned me into astrology really deeply. But there are these collective archetypical fields and energies that people feel collectively as well, and it can be so healing in and of itself, because you're also willing to release as you're watching people, release as well. It's and it's incredible, such a gift.
Because I think, like with any community, right away people will say, "Okay, you're into practicality. How do you make decisions?" That's a valid question. How do you make decisions in the community? And I think I like your analogy of the circle, and then there's the space in the center where that joining and connection is. To me, that's like a symbol of prayer. So we're very much into prayer. So when we have people come together and we pray on something, it's like we don't have an outcome necessarily set in mind. We're not voting on an outcome. We're coming with an openness to pray and be shown. And sometimes something that none of us have even imagined, or thought of, something comes in and lands and everyone goes, yes. It's like a given thing. And it's a very different way of decision-making through prayer. But prayer is our desire. We're going back to the core of, we want connection. We want for the good of the whole. We want to feel expansiveness. And yet you have day-to-day decisions like a pipe breaks, or a car won't start, or, and so it's almost we have to have a culture of prayer and devotion where instead of trying to jump into an analytical way, which is the old way, okay, car won't start and okay, who can do this and who do we need to call and this and that. It's more just joining in prayer. And we've had times where people join in prayer and then the car starts. I mean, just through the joining in the prayer, they don't even have to call the mechanic because that's the way it works. The power of intention, the power of the mind, the power of connecting, is that strong. And that's kind of, I mean, Judy Scutch passed away, but she was the publisher of A Course in Miracles. And I had many dinners with her and her husband. And one time she said that you probably have heard of the Urantia book.
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah.
Well, it's got me actually. I don't know how this works.
It's even bigger than the course. Yeah, it's a big book. But the founders of the Urantia book, the foundation came to visit Judy Scutch, who is the publisher of A Course in Miracles, and they said to Judy, "We're really interested. Your Course in Miracles is really expanding in all these nations and is getting translated in all these languages. Would you mind sharing your business plan with us?" And Judy laughed and said, "We don't have one." And they said, "But it's massive. You guys have been doing this since like 1975, and my God, you don't have a business plan." She said, "No, we just pray." And Judy and I laughed because I said, "Yeah, that's how we started nonprofits. That's how we start anything is we pray, but we don't necessarily have a business plan for the development growth. We leave that to the spirit." It's very different from the world's way of looking at things. It's like, I'm not in charge. There's one within all of us that's in charge, but we try to, leave the symbols to that one to show us and guide us.
Is this an important way to learn to live?
I think so. I mean, I feel like throughout human history, there's been utopian ideas and there's been attempts at utopian communities. But the ego is so clever and so insidious, and it's a death wish. So, and it's mostly unconscious too. So I think that's what sabotages a lot of these attempts to live together in that way. I don't feel like there's any particular form that's better than another because I've done a lot of couples counseling and I work with communities. I went to Brazil and I was in Sao Paulo and 3 different spiritual Course in Miracles communities, the leaders came to me and they said, "Can we meet with you privately? Because we're struggling. It's hard when things fall apart and divisions come and, inner conflicts come." So I spent like a couple hours with them talking about just prayer and devotion and keep a steadfast devotion and really keep it really sacred, this devotion, keep it very sacred. But I feel there's many people now that are doing like you and I with our communities where, some people, it's too far out, it sounds like something out of the 1960s, and I'll say, "Oh, yeah, the 60s were great. Let's do an encounter group with no agenda. Just come together with wanting nothing from each other, but just to see what the spirit wants to show us. Let's have an encounter group like in Berkeley in the 1960s. They're like, "Oh, David, my God, what era? What is your mind living in? This is like 2026." But I learn from experiences of people that have really tried this. I've visited hundreds of communities all over the world to just learn from them
It's
what works.
been such an incredible time to think about that era, that time though as well. We've had Robert Thurman was on the podcast recently, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Dying. And he talked deeply about his experiences with Ram Dass, in those institutions. Today's podcast, at the time of this recording, was Richard Tarnas. Yeah, Richard Tarnas and Cosmos and Psyche, and just looking at how much. I mean, even that conversation in of itself was. I mean, obviously I'm biased because I was in it, but Richard's pursuit was completely depth psychology. His whole thing is depth psychology. And he landed in astrology. It's like you're going all back to your symbol of like going inner on the rings to change the outer. It was like he was trying to go as far in on the rings all the way to desire as possible. And then he found like astrology in the manifest world out there and like the influential. I mean, it's incredible. It's
Yeah.
incredible what happened at that time.
Yeah.
One of my mentors here in Australia, Darpan, he goes, many people say, oh, nothing changed in the 60s. Like some people say that in passing, to him. And he said, no, but before that, like it's actually everywhere. It's actually everywhere. People don't notice before all the cars apparently were black and white. Black and white. And then after the fact, colourful cars started coming. It's like a lot changed in the collective and the collective awareness and consciousness at that time.
Yeah, it's fascinating to follow the links and the connections because, like, the scribe of A Course in Miracles was her name was Helen Schuckman. She was a research psychologist in New York City, but the more she got into scribing the course with her boss was William Thetford, the more she started to look at it and read it some, and then she had questions like she had questions for Jesus, like, wait a minute. What does astrology and the movements of the planets and the spheres, how does that relate, those movements, to the lives of men and women? Like, why is there a connection? Asking Jesus Christ, like the one who's transcended time and space, some really good questions. And I was reading it, and Jesus said, good question. Your mind is so powerful that it's moving all those billions of people on planet Earth around, and outside of that, it's moving all the spheres and the planets around. I just about fell off my bed. I was in bed reading it. I just went, because, to hear Jesus Christ tell me the connection between astrology and the lives of men and women, and I can only imagine Helen was just like, oh my God, like not expecting that answer. But it's just showing how powerful our mind is, and that if we believe in the error, then we can invent with the imagination in many ways.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. Today's conversation's been an absolute, oh my God, so grateful. Now, if you want support in reading your own chart, understand yourself better through the lens of astrology, or even have a look at what's coming up at this time for you, or both, you can book in a reading with myself, amritsandhu.com/reading, amritsandhu.com/reading. Touch wood, it'd be my absolute honor and pleasure to support you with that awareness at this time, if you feel the call.
If we take it back far enough, Jesus is saying, just see how powerful your mind is. And if your mind is powerful enough to forget God, it must be powerful enough to remember God. If you believe you can separate, you must also believe that you can accept the correction. And that just takes it away from a interpersonal perspective where, I can see with your show, people are curious about that. What's happening in 2026? Big shifts happening right around this time, April, May. People are interested in that, but then deeper down when they start to introspect, it's like, okay, and how does that relate to my mind? And Jesus is saying, it takes a lot of mind training, but you can start to see that there's no accidents. Nothing is out of sorts, and that you're just perceiving the world, just like Freud talked about wish fulfillment, that your dreams are wish fulfillment. Jesus is saying what you perceive as your everyday life is also a dream.
Dream, which is a wish fulfillment.
And it's still wish fulfillment. It's still all your time is spent in dreaming, both nighttime and during the day. But there is an escape, which is he calls forgiveness, but it's very different from the forgiveness that you and I were raised with. When we were raised, if somebody said something or did something or harmed you in some way, or that they didn't do something that they should have done, there was a grievance that formed. And we were taught, you need to learn to forgive these people in your life. And Jesus is teaching a completely different view of forgiveness than that. I mean, when I first got into it, I thought, this is just so deep, because he's saying you don't forgive someone for what they did to you. You don't forgive someone for what they didn't do that you think they should have done. You forgive your brother for what they have not done. And I was like, what? Say again? Forgive my brother, my sister for what they have not done. And what he's teaching us is that
Wow,
you see
dude!
how
When
massively
that
different?
lands, oh my
You
god.
see how massively different that is? I was like, holy, 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 my gosh. Because what he's teaching us is
Bro, that is... Sorry, I gotta mute myself.
that one landed. Boom. It's so huge. Because then we're not letting them off the hook. We're letting our mind off the hook. We're letting our consciousness off the hook. We're setting ourselves truly free as God created us. You see, it's a massive difference.
Sublime, divine, intervine, my god.
Oh my.
Sorry, I don't even know where the pieces of my brain are left to pick up in this conversation. I'm so eternally grateful. Touch wood. Wow, that just I mean, it doesn't just flip the script on forgiveness. It requires a complete flip on script of your perception and living felt sense awareness.
Yes.
To which come to from. But then, I mean, how do people start this? Like, is it just carrying that awareness and everything just trickles in downstream from there? How does this practically get laid in?
I think it came to me. It's like we get drip fed moment by moment in terms of guidance. So all these out of pattern experiences, just like when you're podcast, you get to meet these amazing people and telling their amazing stories and amazing miracles. And Jesus is saying, yeah, that's what guidance is meant to be. It's the constructive use of symbols. It's not just symbols for some kind of personal motive. It's like you're doing this podcast for the whole universe, and you can feel it with these guests. You can feel the connections, how big it is. So I started to feel like, wow, my life is not my own as I've known it. And that's why when I first found the course, I just had this feeling like that nothing's going to ever be the same. And then it hasn't been. But also, like you're saying, it has to be a felt experience. It has to be, you have to be aware. There has to be the connection that you let go of the misperception that judged their behavior. Somehow we started to put so much weight on behavior that we got away from what is their essence, you know? Like with Ram Dass, it's not hard to tap into his essence because you read his book and you see his eyes, and he's be here now, and
But then he also says things like, "I don't wish the stroke upon anybody, but I wish them the grace post-stroke upon all." And it's like, it's hard not to feel the essence.
Yeah. But I mean, the part I like when he was describing when the stroke was happening, he said he was laying on the tiles, laying on the floor, looking up at the ceiling tiles, and he just says, look at this. Mr. God is having a stroke. You gotta love the humor. There was a detachment there. Who says that in the middle of a stroke, And,
the kind of person that forgives their brother for what they've not done.
I mean, the essence was shining through right there, like, Mr. God is having a stroke. Because, he's so prolific with, Be Here Now and all the books and the visits to his guru. But I feel like that's why we're just unpacking true forgiveness, because you can see it's so different from this polarity in the world now of who's right and who's wrong, and who's liberal and who's conservative, and who's progressive, who's spiritual. We have got to really see there's something deeper than the labels, because labels are just symbols. And if we stop at the level of labels, we're going to be rejecting. We're going to be caught into, I accept you because you're my friend, you think like me, and I reject you because you don't think like me. And Jesus is like, no, true forgiveness goes much, much deeper. into the mind. It goes to the core. It goes to the essence. Yeah.
Why is reality doing anything at all? What's going on? Why is this going on?
Well, again, I think one of the most succinct expressions of forgiveness, Jesus says, forgiveness is silent and quietly does nothing. It looks and waits and watches and judges not. That says a lot. It's like presence is like the witness self. It's like it witnesses without judgment. But I can't tell you how many retreats I've done over the years called Undoing the Doer. Because when we identify with the person, with the body, it sets up, it's a misidentification because we're really spirit, but it sets up an anxiety. It sets up a guilt. Have I done enough? Could I do more? Did I do well? Could I do better? It sets up a guilt situation. So I would say for me, practicing the presence has been coming into a realization that I haven't done anything. And with that realization is that I am not the doer. I am the being. And with that realization comes, I have not done anything right or wrong. So it's not just trying to escape from guilt by saying, I've never done anything wrong, but it's also saying, or right, because our mind is abstract. It's very vast in its natural state. Even consciousness, most people talk about consciousness as similar to the mind, but I've studied many great teachers and still there can be some confusion, but Jesus clears up the talk about consciousness when Jesus says consciousness is the domain of the ego. I was like, what? Consciousness is the domain of the ego, because he says consciousness has levels and can be trained, but spirit, I amness, presence, it transcends consciousness. It's literally, whoa, that is like, I am that, Nisargadatta, like, oh, whoa. And so Jesus, we have to remember, he's teaching us from the Course. He is the master teacher. He's transcended time and space. So as soon as he said consciousness is the domain of the ego, and of course we want to release the ego, then that means we can seem to do miracles and climb into higher and higher states of consciousness, but there must come a leaping off point where we see we were wrong about it all.
You transcend consciousness itself.
Transcend consciousness itself. And that's that before Abraham was, I am. So
is the entire game a game of self-recognition for the one?
Yeah, it's like that's divine. I call it capital S, self-realization or self-actualization, self-recognition. Know thyself. The Greeks said that's just the aim of everything. And if that's my sole responsibility, then you can start to see that the ego set up this world to get us hooked onto false responsibilities. We believe we're responsible for the body. We believe we're responsible for the actions of the body. Let's say the body is like a puppet. We believe we're responsible for that puppet. And Jesus is like saying, no, there's something deeper. There's a correction. Prior to making the puppets, there's a state of mind that you are, and you are responsible for accepting that. That is what is. So, but he explains it, like he'll say, I would say, well, how do we get into right action? Is there any? I thought the 10 Commandments were mostly about right action. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. And he said, yeah, most of them are about behaviors, but even thou shalt not commit adultery. But then he started saying, if you have lustful thoughts for a woman not your wife, you commit adultery. He started to say, like one of the commandments was, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. And he said, that's in the mind. Coveting is not a behavior. Coveting is lusting after, wanting something. That originates in consciousness. He said, that's where we have to go for the correction. And I said, so you mean the behaviors in the end are not that important? And he said, they're stepping
Symbols of
stone
the thoughts.
symbols.
They're symbols
They're
of the
symbols.
thoughts.
I said to him, I said, how does this work then? And he says, what you do comes from what you think. And you need correction at the thought level before you can escape. Like he said, like the golden rule. He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He said, but you have to perceive yourself and others correctly before that rule really applies. And I said, so how does this occur then? He said, you have judgments, grievances, and attack thoughts in your mind that are part of your consciousness, and you have to purify your mind. You have to empty your mind, like all the saints and mystics have said. Empty your mind of everything it thinks, and come unto the Lord thy God. And so to me, that now is the whole focus of everything. I'm working on purity of thought. Because as long as I'm holding on to grievances of any kind, then I have not forgiven. Uh, Forgive your brother for what he has not done. As long as I'm holding on to the grievance in my consciousness, then that's the block. That's my block to knowing my Creator.
I have a very dear friend. Obviously, respectfully, I'm not going to name her just because this podcast goes to a lot of people. Touch wood. But her mother passed away, and even in her passing, there was some. It wasn't a smooth transition between her and her mother as her mother passed away. But then also throughout her life, her mother had favored other children, different era, girls, boys, all this sort of stuff, right? And yeah, it's been a lot for this individual to process that one's mother was that way towards them, and and all the guilt and sadness from like, hey, like I wanted to feel more. This it's so embroiling in a space like this when the rubber hits the road for someone. Part of me wants me to send her this podcast between you and I, but then I'm also curious as to what she'd really get from it. Like what are we going to say to someone like that that's practically in the front lines, on the trenches, been struggling with this for better part of a year plus now, and it seems to just continue to hook in further and deeper, touchwood, rather than actually release in some ways.
Yeah, I have seen this example come up many times, and I go back again to when Jesus said, "Who is my father, mother, sister, brother? He that does the will of my Father in heaven is father, mother, sister, brother." So what Jesus is teaching us is that when we fall asleep in this dream world, we really we don't come as like a happy little soul and land and incarnate. We actually, he says, when you come to this world, you bring the whole world with you. It's entirely holographic. So everything we perceive as our self, our parents, our siblings, our culture, our language, everything is all holographically unpacked, almost like our little soul had like a little backpack. And when we go, okay, I'm going to have an Earth experience, and we throw out the whole Earth, the whole cosmos. We throw out our parents, prearranged contracts. It's all just as we prefer it and wish it to be. And then there's no equality because it's a backpack of separation. It's leaving God and throwing out this form. So what I learned from Jesus is he said that you have a real self, which is called Christ, and then you have a make-believe self-concept, which is your personality self and all the persons that you surround yourself with, and then the cosmos and the world. It's the whole thing. So, like Carolyn May said, you have soul contracts before you come in. You've already prearranged all this. And we prearranged it because we wanted these characters to act out separation for us. And then we hold grievances against the characters for what we handed out the parts at a mind level, at a consciousness level. We say, hey, you're going to play the mom. You're going to have favoritism. You're going to favor all the other ones, not me. And I'm going to hold grievances against you for being that way. But then when he says, everyone's just acting out like an anomaly, like in Matrix, a belief, and they're just acting it out perfectly. You should be giving them standing ovations and Oscars for how mom acted that out. But we have to get deeper into the mind to the wish to separate, because we only can forgive when we start to realize that we chose hatred in our mind, and then we chose to have the world act out that hatred in various different forms, like for example, a mother. So what we do when we go much deeper is we start to undo our self-concept. The David, the Amrit, the cultural conditioning we had, the background, the parents, the families, the cultures. There is a point where we actually start to transcend that, but while it's happening, we need to start to realize that these characters are acting out thoughts in our consciousness, and that we have the ability to release those thoughts because they're grievances. And that brings it back to how empowered our mind is. And that undoes the victim mentality, because that's the biggest problem. To believe in the ego is to believe in abuse, mistreatment, victimization, unfair treatment, injustice. All those things are projections of the ego. And Jesus is showing us that we're not that ego. We're free if we choose to be. So not everybody's ready to hear it. I went through similar things with my parents, and then at one point, my father, my biological father, he just said, Dave, I'm sorry, I really was not a very good father. And I just looked at him and smiled, and I said, listen, that game of differences is over. You did the best that you could do based on what you believed. I did the best that I could do based on what I believe. Let's call it quits. Let's not hold any more grievances against each other, because we were just these characters were operating out of our belief system, and those beliefs aren't true. And then he just smiled at me, and wow, the rest of his life before he passed away, we were buddies. We were like equals, buddies. Where are you off to teach next, David? And, and all this. And so even at the end of his life, he went into a coma, and I was traveling, and I came back, and my mother and my sister said, your dad's in intensive care and he's in a coma and everything. You want to go and visit him? I go to visit my dad in the hospital. He comes out of the coma.
Stop talking!
He came out of the coma, and he's like, Dave. And we had a regular conversation, but before I got to the hospital, he was laying there in a coma. And you should have seen the look on my mother and my sister's face. So I've had I had a raising the dead experience too, actually. Believe it or not, I was doing my course workbook lesson, and I was just diligently devoted to do my course workbook lesson. But the lesson of the day was, there is no death. The Son of God is free. So, this is not something that we're used to, but I was going to a grocery store to get my grandmother some salad. And I walked into I was guided to go to another grocery store that I usually don't go to. I walk in, and I look, and there's some woman laid out on the floor of the grocery store, and she's not breathing. And I look, and the paramedics were trying to revive her, and then they couldn't. So they backed off and they went away. And I went back, and I went, I had this lesson in my mind, my one lesson I'm to concentrate on for the whole day. There is no death, the Son of God is free. So I'm later like that. And then I go back and I'm leaning my hand against the frozen foods, and this energy is going through my third eye and through my heart. And my lesson of the day is like a Rolodex. There is no death, the Son of God is free. And I'm watching this body, it's just laying there on the floor. And then I look, and the diaphragm of the body starts to move, and the woman starts to breathe again after the paramedics have already left. And this was me doing my lesson of the day from A Course in Miracles. And Jesus is saying, it's death is an internal belief. It's the ego. And he was just showing me that the ego doesn't rule your mind. He was just using the symbols, because I didn't make a big deal out of it. I just went and got my salad and paid for it and left, and more people came around the woman and, to attend to her. But that was for me. That was for my mind, not for David.
Why do I feel like the podcast needs a bit of a disclaimer at this point? Because then that's interesting to talk about, right? Because there's probably some fear in there. Because there's probably some people tuning into this podcast that would, it can be quite the, just stability of the mind to sort of consider that absolutely every single thing that is happening externally in my reality is a projection of exactly what's internally happening within me.
Yeah.
Some people may not be ready for that, David, right?
Yeah.
Or am I just kidding myself and that everybody needs to go there? Like there's a disclaimer of sorts here, isn't there?
I do feel that way. I do feel like I was aware that everything that I was going through was my lesson, and that it was not for everyone. And I do feel like we've had to talk about that when we talked about victimization and abuse and everything, because the power of the mind, I think, is kind of is a scary thing, because we seem to be able to have nightmares and perceive all kinds of things. But I think I was prepared for it a little bit. Like most people, I don't think that would have been just freaky for most people. But Jesus has 50 miracle principles at the beginning of the book, and one of them is, he says, you can heal the sick and raise the dead because you made sickness and death and can abolish them both. So I'd already read that statement, but that is like a very deep statement, that this book is not from a human being. This is like a scripture that's coming like directly from divinity. And I mean, we know how people have had issues with the Bhagavad Gita, with the Bible, with many, many scriptures. And then I think, to me, A Course in Miracles is such a direct pathway to God that, yeah, I agree. It has to be, there has to be a readiness for it. I even tell people, I said, The Course in Miracles is not for everyone, because there are so many thousands of pathways to God, and they're all very valid. And this is just one among many, among thousands. And yet, wow, it is so direct that yeah, I feel like I say that all the time. I think Jesus even said that 2,000 years ago when he would walk. His first words would usually be, "For those that have the ears to hear, let them hear." He would preface his talk with those words, because I think he knew that what was coming out was going to be like otherworldly.
So you raised your dad from the coma. Sorry, still getting over reading that. And also, like Jesus, do you think Jesus walked on water? Like, you think that practically actually happened?
I think in the perception of the apostles, he was working with them closely, and I think they were out in a boat and there was a storm, and I think that those kind of things, which seem so beyond anything we can think of, I think because perception is just a reflection of mind, that I feel like probably because he was working with the apostles in such an intimate way. But that may have been shocking, but I think it was more shocking when he came back to the upper room and visited them. Like the Urantia book, I think you said you have, it says he appeared in a Morantia form like 23 times, I believe. And I imagine those were all, each one was probably like, there is a movie too that I show, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's called Risen. And the movie is from the perspective of a Roman centurion, the same Roman centurion that took the spear when Jesus was bleeding on the cross and jabbed it up in his ribs. But then, as you follow the movie, at one point, he's told by Pontius Pilate, you've got to find this body of Jesus, because otherwise the apostles are going to make up a story, and the Sanhedrin are worried that they're going to say that he is risen. We don't want that to happen. So he went around trying to find Jesus, the body of Jesus. And finally, he does find the guards and the stoners roll away. But then he's looking then for the apostles. He wants to find out about the apostles. But there's one scene where he comes up to what they call the upper room. Here comes a Roman centurion, the one who'd already seen Jesus die and has seen him die. And he goes up to the upper room with his sword in hand. He pushes open the door and he sees Mary Magdalene, and he sees the apostles, and then he just starts spinning. He looks and this Jesus is there. And you can imagine that's where you have to question what's real. Because, in perception in this world, dead is dead and gone. It's not dead and back again. But Jesus is in the room smiling, and he's scanning the room, and then he does a double take because he has this flash in his mind of this bloodied, dead body that he washed. And now he's seeing a smiling Jesus with the apostles. It's one of the most powerful scenes I've ever seen in cinema. The movie's called Risen, but he has to do like a double take because it just overthrows everything that he ever thought he knew about the world and human life. We were talking about that at the beginning. That's even more shocking than raising the dead. Is coming back from the dead. It almost is showing that the world is only symbols, and that they can be seen again. It's one of those moments I have to replay when I watch that movie Risen, because I have to pause the movie every time I see that scene of that centurion going up into the upper room and seeing Jesus alive after he, put the sword in his ribs to take part in killing him. It was a total flip. We talked about of upside down perception, and then suddenly like, oh my God, what is this? That's very strong.
I often reflect on whether it's a propensity for the Western mind or the Eastern mind, or just mind in and of itself, that is seeking miracle. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like there's a yearning for something inexplicable to occur to me, please, so I may pop through that this is not all that there is. The yearning for miracle and the mind's relationship with miracle, because if it has a revelatory experience and it goes, whoa, it's almost looking for something to convince itself, just again, the consciousness living within the ego structure looking for something that tells itself about what's beyond itself. It's quite the thing, the mind and its relationship with miracle. I've sat with it for a bit just in contemplation of even just picking up the book. It's just like, Mary Ann Williamson was on the podcast talking about the book. She goes, people have this on their coffee table for years and don't open it. Don't stress, hun. It's like a crystal.
Yeah, I know. I've met a lot of them. Yeah.
That made me feel a lot better.
That's it. I think That's why I think there's a part in the Course in Miracles where Jesus says miracles should not be used as spectacles to induce belief. That's an interesting thing coming from Jesus. Because, when we think of miracles, we sometimes think of these fantastic, out of pattern kind of experiences, raising the dead and healing the sick and healing the blind. But I think the more you study A Course in Miracles, you realize that Jesus would say things after someone seemed to be healed of blindness or leprosy or whatever. He would say, by your faith you are healed. He would always bring it back to the power of the mind and by faith, because oftentimes people say, why are some healed and some not healed? And Jesus is slowly teaching us how powerful our mind is, and that even in the Course, he says, even at the point of death, you could rise up and say, I have no need of this at all. He's just always encouraging us to see how powerful our mind is and therefore our beliefs and thoughts, and asking us to question that. So he's really not into spectacles. And in the Bible, he would sometimes say, tell no man. Like when a blind man could see or something, he would just say, tell no man. Like he wasn't trying to get a big ministry going. Oh, hey, this guy is healing the sick and raising the dead. His message was, heaven is real, and you can experience heaven, and that is even transcends all these experiences on earth. He wasn't trying to make spectacles. I mean, even without trying, he seemed to stir things up plenty.
I mean, I'm too deep in a place in this conversation with you. It's, even as you're using the word spectacle, I can't help but reflect on the word perception. There we go, perception, and then spectacle and eye and lens and spectacle and miracle. Anyway, it's revelatory, absolutely revelatory. There is, I know we are coming up on time, and that is like, I can't be sad, but I am. Oh, but anyway, stop. But there is, the fearing. We talked about belief and then coming into desire and how to actually work with the belief. Thank you so much for your response to that. For those of us that are coming from perception down into emotion and then we hit the ring of fear, there seems to be like quite a trampoline kind of liminal edge here that we can sort of, and many of us probably know it, that are looking to do the work. How do we work through this element here, this ring of fear?
Well, I think that is like a lifelong calling, just like with the Vipassana founders. Once they hit the ring of fear, then they share their notes. But I think that's where faith comes in. That faith and belief can combine into a power. Jesus says that can power surge that can move mountains. So he's asking us to go more into our intuitive guidance, to go become more intuitive and more intuitive. And as we do, our perception of the world changes, and we don't put our belief in credence into appearances. Because for the ego, appearances are very important. Beautiful, ugly, attractive, unattractive, it's paramount. But the more we go into faith, it's more like coming into the prayer of the heart for purification, like that Beatitudes, like the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. They shall see the light of heaven. So I think this is what I call mysticism. This is where we enter a realm of devotion where we realize, oh my gosh, the whole point is to know our Creator. And in order to know our Creator, we are going to have to transcend fear. And we've had plenty of great movies that have shown us that, even Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's got to cross the canyon and it looks like he's going to step off and go dropping down to the bottom of a canyon while his father is suffering in a nearby room. But he just looks at his little book, Leap of Faith, his little symbol, So he puts the foot out and it lands on something that from his angle is not visible. And then he walks across the canyon, just like Jesus walking on water. He walks across the canyon and then he throws stones back, like for the next person so they can
Step on them.
But he needed that faith. Harrison Ford, what a beautiful scene. He needed that faith to put that foot down, where all of his past learning was telling me he's just going to topple into the canyon, but he doesn't. And I think that's where faith comes in.
Meets
I've had many
fortune favors the bold. The universe rewards courage. Yeah. It comes up to meet. Yeah, its hand comes up to meet your foot in some ways.
Exactly.
Touch wood. But there is an impulse that's required from you, which is it. Anyway. I am so looking forward to listening back to this podcast. My goodness. David. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, energy, and presence here today. Having said that as well, it's ever evident that today's conversation stands on a body of work that is not just it's your life. So thank you so much for being here, being present with us and sharing yourself so openly and abundantly here today. And ultimately from all of us here at the Inspired Evolution, Touchwood, thank you so much for you. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrit. What a joy to come together. First time I saw your podcast, I felt, that sounds like a delicious podcast.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. It's, to your point earlier, just, following the calls, following the nudges, following, the engineer in me still wakes up every day going, I'm a what? I still find myself when I'm telling people on the street, it's like, I'm a podcaster. And I find myself getting all like contracted before I say it because there's this fear of what their judgment's going to be. And it's like, I'm just so comfortable being the engineer. But to your point about what you said earlier, allowing the courage to show up, to be different, inspired again and again, inspired to evolve daily. It's been a whole journey and continues to be, as you said, towards the end of your response as well there. Thank you so much again. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Amrit.
You made it through to the end of another really incredible episode, Touchwood. Thank you so much for your inspirations to evolve. It is such an honor to be your brother walking this path by your side. To all of you that are subscribed to the channel, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everything you see around here, it's all powered and empowered by you championing this podcast. Costs you absolutely nothing. It's absolutely free. Hit the subscribe button below. And it supports love, positivity, and wisdom like this being spread through the channel. Thank you so much. Thank you for your support. It really goes such a long way. Cannot thank you enough. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors in the Inspired Evolution. Please join the community, join the movement, spreading love, positivity, and wisdom like this around the planet together. Thank you so much in advance for your incredible support. It costs you absolutely nothing. It's completely free. Just hit that subscribe button. It helps power the entire movement. Thank you. Friendly reminder again, we have, if you're inspired by this content and you want to forge it into real connection, we have the Inspired Evolution Community Circle, the Circle online as well. You can check it out, inspiredevolution.com/circle if you feel the call for more community in this Aquarian time like this. And on screen now for you to dive in even deeper on your journey of the Inspired Evolution, the next best episode. So go on, take your pick and make your click. I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you there.